Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It's strange, the way some places stop moving in time. You can walk out of them for months, even years, and when you come back, they're still standing there like they've been holding their breath the entire time you were gone, just waiting for you to walk back in and exhale. That's what my childhood bedroom feels like. I moved out of my parents' house last year. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no storming off in a fit of independence. It was just time. I had found a small condo that fit my budget barely, and it felt like the natural next step. The first night I slept there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I remember thinking, so this is adulthood, just quieter and lonelier. Even after I moved, I kept going back to my parents' place most weekends. Not because I couldn't live without them, although in a way maybe I couldn't, but because I liked being there, helping my mom around the house, sitting with my dad on the couch, not even talking, just watching whatever cricket match or random documentary he had on, eating home-cooked meals that tasted like more than just food, they tasted like home. And of course, my room was still there, exactly as I left it. It's not a big room you couldn't swing your arms around without hitting the wall, but it's full of history. The bed is the same one I slept in through high school, the same bed where I stayed up late studying for exams or scrolling through my phone under the covers when I was supposed to be asleep. The same bed I cried in when I was 12 and my dad had to leave for the US again, knowing I wouldn't see him for months. The walls are still painted the same light lavender I begged for when I was 14. Back then, I thought it was the most sophisticated color in the world. Now it's a little faded, but it makes me smile. And then there are the shelves. Most people's shelves are filled with books or random knickknacks. Mine hold pieces of my life. There are trophies from school, not that I was an athlete, but I participated in enough events to collect a couple of participation awards that, for some reason, I never threw out. A few stuffed animals that were once my most trusted confidants. A small photo frame with a picture of my dad holding me when I was just a toddler. We're both smiling, and I can still see the way his eyes crinkle when he's happy. And of course the dolls. They're not just any dolls. These are collectible edition Barbies and other special dolls my dad brought me when he came back from his work trips in the US. He never just gave them to me randomly, they were events. He'd walk in, drop his heavy bag in the hallway, hug us, and then he'd look at me with that little smile that meant, "I've got something for you." Some of them were princess-themed, with elaborate gowns that shimmered under the plastic packaging. Others were seasonal editions, Christmas, springtime, special anniversaries. I never took them out of the box. It wasn't because I didn't want to play with them, trust me I did, but because even as a kid I knew they were special. I liked seeing them all lined up, perfect and untouched like little treasures. I never thought of them as investments or things I'd sell. They were more like time capsules. Every one of them was tied to a moment: my dad's return after months away, the excitement of seeing him, the smell of his jacket still cold from the airplane, the sound of his voice saying my name. When I moved into my condo, I took a lot of things with me: clothes, my laptop, kitchen stuff, but not everything. My condo is tiny. The kind of place where if you leave a bag of groceries on the counter, you have to shuffle around it to get to the sink. There's no room for 10 box dolls, let alone all the other things from my childhood, so I left them where they'd always been, on the top shelf in my bedroom at my parents' house. It's funny, people always talk about your old room like it stops being yours the second you move out. But my room is still mine. It's a place where I can shut the door and instantly feel 17 again. It's where my life before adulthood is still alive, frozen in perfect detail. And maybe that's why what happened that weekend bothered me so much. Because someone didn't just step into a room, they stepped into my history, and they thought they had the right to touch it. When I was a kid, my dad wasn't always home. That's not because he didn't want to be, far from it. He worked in the United States for long stretches at a time while my mom, my sister, and I stayed in Canada. It wasn't the kind of job where you could just clock out and go home at 5 p.m. It was the kind of job where home was a plane ride away. Sometimes months would pass before we saw him again. We'd talk on the phone, of course, but it was never the same. I missed the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the way he'd open the fridge and somehow always find something to snack on that no one else thought to eat. I missed his laugh, deep, warm, the kind of laugh that made you feel like everything was okay. When you're a kid, time moves differently. A week feels like a month feels like forever. So when my dad left, the countdown to his return felt endless. But there was always this one constant. When he came back, he brought something for me. Not because I asked for it, I never made lists or sent him requests, but because he just knew. He knew I loved dolls, and not just any dolls, the kind with delicate gowns, sparkling tiaras, and shoes so tiny they could disappear into the carpet if you weren't careful. The first collectible Barbie he gave me was during the winter I turned 8. It was a winter princess edition with a gown of icy blue satin and a faux fur collar that looked softer than clouds. The box had this little shimmer to it when you tilted it under the light. I remember running my fingers over the plastic, tracing the outline of her dress, feeling this bubbling excitement in my chest. "Can I open her?" I asked, half expecting him to say yes. But he smiled and said, "Not this one, sweetheart, this one's special, she's for keeping, not playing." I didn't understand completely at the time, but I agreed. I liked the idea of having something special, something that wasn't like my other toys, which would eventually end up with tangled hair and missing shoes. Over the years, the collection grew. There was the spring blossom Barbie with tiny painted flowers on her dress, the holiday celebration Barbie in deep red velvet, the box decorated with golden swirls. There was even a Millennium Princess Barbie from the year 2000, which felt like owning a piece of history. I never took them out of the boxes, not once. It wasn't just about keeping them in perfect condition. It was about preserving the moment they represented, that exact feeling of my dad walking through the door after months away, his arms open for a hug, and then reaching into his suitcase for that telltale rectangular box. Each doll was a marker in my timeline. Age 8, the winter princess, snow outside, dad's jacket smelling faintly of cold air and airplane seats. Age 9, spring blossom Barbie, the year I got my first real bike and dad taught me how to ride without training wheels in the parking lot. Age 10, holiday celebration Barbie, the Christmas we finally had snow on Christmas Eve. Age 12, millennium princess, late gift found at a collector's shop. The year I was starting to understand how hard my dad worked to give us these moments. By the time I was a teenager, the dolls weren't just dolls, they were a symbol of his love. And maybe even more than that, they were proof that distance didn't mean absence, that even when he was far away, he thought of me. When I moved out last year, I didn't even think about taking them with me, not because I didn't want them, but because the top shelf in my old bedroom felt like their rightful place. I could see them when I visited on weekends, run my hand along the boxes, remember. They sat there in their perfect little row, 10 of them, each in a clear display box, each untouched by time. At least that's how it was until Jane came along. Some people think it's just stuff. That's their favorite line whenever you get upset about someone mishandling your belongings. Oh, come on, it's just stuff. I've learned that the people who say that are usually the ones who have never had to replace anything with their own money, or the ones who never had something truly sentimental ruined by carelessness. Growing up, my room was my safe zone. It was where I kept the things that meant something to me, whether they were valuable or not. I wasn't the type of kid who could just shrug if someone broke something I loved. I felt it deep in my stomach like a little knot of loss. And I learned early on that not everyone respects boundaries. The first time my space was violated, I was around 11. My mom had invited a family friend over, a woman she'd known for years, and she brought her 2 sons with her. They were younger than me, maybe 6 or 7, the kind of age where curiosity is constant and destructive. I had been in the kitchen helping my mom carry snacks to the living room when I realized it was too quiet upstairs. Quiet is never a good sign when kids are involved. I went up to check and sure enough, my bedroom door was wide open. Both boys were inside. One was on my bed, jumping like it was a trampoline, while the other was at my shelf, pulling down my play Barbies, not the collector's thankfully, but still mine. "Hey," I shouted, running in. The one at the shelf dropped a doll, literally dropped her onto the carpet. I picked it up, already seeing her hair tangled beyond saving. "What are you doing in my room?" I demanded. They didn't answer, they just looked at me like I was being unreasonable for asking. Eventually their mom came upstairs, laughed and said, "Oh, boys will be boys." No apology, no effort to make them stop. She just herded them downstairs like they hadn't just wrecked part of my afternoon. It happened again when I was 15. This time it was my cousin's little girl. My cousin and her husband were visiting, and again I had told my mom, "Please don't let kids in my room," not because I didn't like kids, I actually do, but because I know what happens when kids are left alone with shiny objects and zero supervision. I came upstairs to find my cousin's daughter sitting on the floor in my room, surrounded by my stationery, using my gel pens to draw on my homework. When she saw me, she smiled like she'd made me a gift. She'd drawn a giant rainbow across the back of a math assignment I hadn't even turned in yet. Her parents, they thought it was cute. It wasn't cute when I had to redo the entire thing by hand. Those incidents stuck with me. They taught me two things. People don't value your belongings the way you do. If you don't protect your space, no one else will. So over the years, I got used to keeping certain things out of reach. My collectible dolls were always on the top shelf, the kind of shelf you couldn't get to without a chair, and I made it clear to my mom every time guests came over that my room was off limits. And for the most part, she respected that. Until Jane. Jane wasn't just a guest. She was one of those older women who carried herself like she owned every room she walked into. Loud voice, strong opinions, the kind of person who would comment on the way you sit, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, and somehow make you feel like you had to defend yourself. I'd had run-ins with her before, comments about how kids these days are spoiled. How back in her day, children didn't care about toys, they cared about helping their parents. Once, she even told me my dolls were a waste of money when she saw them on the shelf during a family gathering. So when I heard she was coming over that weekend with her granddaughter, I had a sinking feeling. I told my mom, clearly, firmly, do not let them upstairs. And I meant it. That weekend started out like any other. I'd taken the train in on Friday evening, arriving at my parents' place just in time for dinner. The air had that early spring chill, the kind that makes you zip your jacket up all the way but still smells faintly of fresh grass. My mom had made biryani and the house smelled like warm spices and home. My dad was already seated at the table, reading something on his phone, glasses low on his nose. We ate, we talked, and afterwards I helped my mom with the dishes while my dad settled in to watch TV. Nothing about that evening hinted at the irritation I'd be feeling the next day. The next morning, my mom mentioned casually over breakfast, "Oh, by the way, Jane might come by today, she said she's in the area." I froze mid-bite. Jane with the granddaughter. "Yes," my mom said like she was announcing the weather. "She's bringing her for a visit." Immediately, a knot formed in my stomach. I put my spoon down and said, "Okay, listen, please don't let them go upstairs, especially not into my room." My mom gave me that look the one parents give when they think you're overreacting. Why would she go in your room? I almost laughed, because she's Jane, you know how she is, she likes to look around. Remember last time, she wandered into your pantry and started opening jars? My mom sighed but nodded. All right, I'll tell her not to go upstairs." I should have felt reassured, but I didn't. By noon, I heard the knock at the door. Jane's voice came first, loud, commanding, filling the hallway before she even stepped inside. "Salam, how is everyone?" I walked into the living room and there she was, wearing a floral scarf, her hair pinned back in that tight way that made her face look like it was carved from stone. Her granddaughter trailed behind her, a little girl with a frilly pink dress, white tights, and a plastic tiara sliding down her hair. "Hello, Beta," Jane said to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Still in your little apartment?" I smiled politely. "Still in my condo, yes." My mom ushered them in, offering tea and biscuits. I stayed for a bit, making small talk, but I had work to finish, some notes I was reviewing for an online course, so I excused myself and went to the small study room downstairs. Before I left, I reminded my mom one more time, "Remember, don't let them go upstairs." She waved me off. "Go to your work, they won't go anywhere." And for a while I believed her. I sat in the study, tapping on my laptop, half listening to the muffled voices from the living room. I could hear Jane talking about her neighbor's wedding, her granddaughter occasionally piping up about some cartoon she liked. It was background noise, harmless. Then about half an hour later I heard footsteps on the stairs. Light ones at first, the little girl's, followed by heavier ones. At first I thought maybe my mom had gone up to get something, but then I heard Jane's voice. "Look at all these doors, which one is hers?" My stomach dropped. I sat there, frozen for a moment, debating whether to rush up immediately or wait to see if they'd turn back. But then I heard the creak of my bedroom door opening. And Jane's voice again, "Oh, look at these dolls." That was it, I was up the stairs in seconds. The sight that met me when I reached the top of the stairs was exactly what I had been dreading. My bedroom door was wide open. Jane was inside. Not just standing near the doorway, not just peeking in, no. She was deep into the room, already halfway into my closet, leaning on the chair I usually keep tucked neatly under my desk so she could reach the top shelf. And in her hand, one of my dolls. The Winter Princess Barbie, my very first collector's edition, still in the original box, the plastic pristine after all these years. She was holding it casually, one hand gripping the box like it was just any other toy you might pick up at a garage sale. Her granddaughter stood nearby, eyes wide and glittering, pointing at the shelf where the other dolls sat. "I want that one, the princess," she said, bouncing on her toes. I stepped into the room, my voice sharper than I intended. "What are you doing in here?" Jane turned, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Oh, Beta, I was just showing her the dolls. She loves dolls, you know. I thought she could play with one for a bit." My heart was pounding. Those aren't for playing, they're collectibles, that's why they're still in the boxes. Jane blinked at me as if I'd just told her I kept jars of dirt on my shelf. "Oh, come on, they're dolls. What's the point of a doll if not to play with it? Kids these days," she trailed off, glancing at her granddaughter who was now staring at me like I was the villain in this scenario. I walked over, holding my hands out. "Please give that back, it's in the box for a reason." Jane hesitated, actually hesitated, before passing it over, and when she did, she rolled her eyes like I was being absurd. "You're too sensitive about these things. In our time, if a child wanted to play, we let them play." I ignored the comment, carefully placing the doll back on the top shelf. I positioned it exactly where it had been before, making sure the box edges were aligned with the others. My fingers were trembling slightly, not because of fear, but because of the rush of frustration flooding through me. Behind me, the little girl's voice wavered. "I want the princess." Her lower lip trembled and I could feel the storm brewing. Jane put an arm around her, patting her head. "She's just a little girl, you can let her have one for a while, can't you?" "No," I said firmly, turning to face them. "These are important to me, they're not toys to be taken out of the box. If she wants to play, I have other dolls she can use." Jane's smile tightened. "You're making such a big deal out of nothing. You young people have too many rules for everything." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Please, can you both leave my room?" There was a long pause where she just looked at me like she was deciding whether to push further. Then, with a small tisk, she took her granddaughter's hand and walked out, muttering something under her breath in a tone meant for me to hear but not quite understand. I closed the door behind them and took a deep breath, the air in my room suddenly feeling heavier. My eyes went back to the dolls on the shelf, perfectly still, but somehow I felt like their safety had been compromised. In Chapter 6, I'll cover the aftermath downstairs, the little girl's crying, your attempt to offer her other dolls, and Jane's continued attitude. When I came downstairs a few minutes later, the air in the living room felt completely different. Jane was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, her granddaughter curled up beside her with a tear-streaked face. The little girl was sniffling dramatically, her small fists rubbing at her eyes as if she had just survived some great tragedy. My mom was perched on the edge of the armchair opposite them, looking from Jane to me with that wide-eyed, "What just happened?" expression. The moment I stepped in, Jane didn't waste a second. "Your daughter wouldn't even let her play with a doll," she announced loudly as though I had committed a crime. "I mean, what's the harm? She's 5 years old, she just wanted to hold it." My mom glanced at me, then back at Jane, clearly caught between being polite to her guest and defending me. "They're special dolls," she said hesitantly, "not toys she plays with." Jane gave a disbelieving laugh. "Special? They're dolls. When we were young, we didn't waste money on things just to look at them." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I stayed calm. "I have other dolls," I said, moving toward the hall closet. "Ones I played with when I was younger, she can use those." Jane didn't answer me, but her granddaughter lifted her head hopefully. I pulled out a small storage box from the closet and set it on the coffee table. Inside were a handful of dolls from my childhood, ones with tangled hair, a few missing shoes, but still perfectly fine for playtime. The little girl dug through them for a moment, but it was clear she wasn't interested. She glanced back toward the stairs, lower lip jutting out. "I want the princess one." I knelt beside her. Sweetie, that one is special to me, but these are fun too. Look, this one even has bendy knees. She pushed the box slightly away from herself, clearly unimpressed. Jane gave me that smirk again, the kind that says she thinks she's already won whatever invisible argument she's having in her head. See, she doesn't want these, she wanted the other one. I stood up, taking a slow breath. Then I'm sorry, but she's not getting it. There was a beat of silence. The little girl's face crumpled and she started crying again, louder this time, more performative. Jane murmured something to her in a soft, consoling voice, but every now and then she shot me a look like I was the cruel stepmother in some fairy tale. I wasn't going to apologize. Eventually, Jane sipped her tea loudly and announced they should probably get going since the mood in the house wasn't right. She made a point of thanking my mom for the snacks, completely skipping over me. The sound of the front door closing was like a physical release of tension. My mom sat back down, exhaling. You could have been a little nicer, she said gently. She's just a child. She's a child, I agreed, but Jane is, and she knows better than to go into someone's room and start touching things without asking. My mom pursed her lips, clearly not wanting to take sides, but she didn't argue. I went back upstairs to my room and shut the door, just standing there for a while. The dolls were all in place, but I kept glancing at the Winter Princess Barbie, half expecting to find a smudge on the plastic or a dent in the box. There wasn't, but the sense of security I'd felt about leaving them here was gone. That evening, after Jane had gone and the house had finally quieted down, my mom came into my room with 2 mugs of chai. She handed me one and sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. She didn't speak at first. She just looked around, her gaze drifting over the shelves, the neatly arranged dolls, the lavender walls that still carried the faint scent of my old vanilla candle. You know she'll talk, my mom said finally, sipping her tea. Jane, she'll tell people you didn't let a little girl play with a doll. I let out a humorless laugh. Let her talk. If people think that makes me a bad person, that's their problem. My mom sighed. It's not about good or bad, it's about, you know how women like her are. In our culture, they think children should be allowed to touch anything. No boundaries. The idea of collectibles makes no sense to them. They think, why keep something just to look at it? I knew she was right. I'd seen it before, especially with older South Asian women. They grew up in households where privacy wasn't a priority. Everyone's doors were open, belongings were shared, and the concept of "this is mine, not for you" was almost alien. When my parents were growing up, you didn't have much, so what you did have was communal. A pot of food on the stove wasn't yours, it was for the whole family. Clothes got passed down, toys, if you had any, got shared among siblings and cousins. It was a way of life. But my life was different. I'd grown up in Canada. I had my own room from the age of 8, my own desk, my own closet. I had things that were mine and I was allowed to protect them. I get that, I said, swirling the tea in my cup, but there's a difference between sharing and someone walking into your room without asking and picking up your stuff. That's just disrespect. My mom nodded slowly. Jane, she's like that, she's nosy, she thinks she has a right to look at everything. That's not curiosity, I said, that's entitlement. My mom's eyes softened. You know, when your father brought those dolls for you, even I didn't touch them without asking. I knew they were special to you, but to Jane, they're just toys. She'll never understand why they matter. I thought about explaining it, how each doll was tied to a memory, a specific moment of my dad's return, the sacrifices he'd made to be able to bring me those gifts. But I realized I didn't need to explain it to my mom. She already knew. She's not going to stop coming over, is she? I asked. No, my mom said, she's an old friend, but I told her not to go into your room again. That's not enough, I said, we need to put a lock on the door. My mom frowned. A lock, is that necessary? After today, yes. She didn't argue, she just nodded, taking another sip of her tea. The next morning, the air in the house felt lighter, probably because Jane wasn't in it, but I still had that unsettled feeling in my chest. It's the same feeling you get after someone been in your home without your permission. Even if nothing is missing, even if nothing is broken, you feel different about the space. Like there's an invisible smudge that no amount of cleaning can remove. Over breakfast, I brought it up again. "We need to put a lock on my bedroom door." My mom didn't even try to downplay it this time. She just nodded and said, "Your father has an extra latch in the garage. He can put it on today." By mid-morning, my dad appeared in the hallway with a small cardboard box under his arm, the faint smell of dust clinging to it. Inside was a simple brass lock and a pair of keys. I stood in the doorway as he worked, the sound of the drill echoing in the room. With each screw tightened, I felt something loosening in me, the tension from yesterday slowly winding down. When he was done, he handed me one key. "This one's yours, keep it safe." I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of it. "Thanks, Dad." He gave me a small smile. "You've always been protective of your things. Even when you were little, you'd put your favorite toys on the highest shelf so no one could reach them." It was true, I'd been doing that for as long as I could remember. Not because I didn't want to share anything, I was happy to share things that didn't matter as much to me, but because I hated the feeling of seeing something I cherished get damaged. That thought triggered another memory. I must have been about 7 when my cousin came over with her toddler. I had this small music box shaped like a carousel that my grandmother had given me. The paint was delicate with little gold details along the horses. It played a soft, tinkling melody when you wound it up. I'd left it on my desk because I'd been listening to it the night before. The toddler got his hands on it while I was in the kitchen, and by the time I came back, one of the horses was snapped clean off. I remember holding the broken piece in my palm, trying to fit it back into place, but it never sat right again. The music still played, but every time I heard it, I thought about that missing horse. That was the day I started putting important things away: top shelves, boxes, drawers with makeshift locks like rubber bands around the handles. The lock my dad had just installed felt like the final, adult version of that same instinct. When we tested it, the click of the latch sliding into place was more satisfying than it should have been. I shut the door, locked it, unlocked it again. The barrier was there now, and it was mine to control. Later that day, my mom told me she'd already spoken to Jane on the phone. Apparently, she'd warned her not to go into my room again. Jane's response: "Oh, I was just looking, she's overreacting." I didn't care, she could think what she wanted. She wasn't getting past that door again. Before I moved out, I thought of my parents' house as home, full stop. Even after getting my condo, part of me still did. The condo was mine in the technical sense, my name on the lease, my furniture, my bills, but it always felt a little temporary, like a place I was renting from adulthood until I figured out where I actually belonged. It's small, painfully so. The kitchen is basically a galley, the kind where you can open the fridge and touch the opposite counter without moving your feet. The living room is just big enough for a couch, a coffee table, and a TV stand. My bedroom can fit my bed, a narrow dresser, and not much else. That's why so much of my life remained at my parents' place: clothes I didn't wear every week, childhood keepsakes, the kind of sentimental clutter you don't use but can't bear to part with, the dolls. Their house had space for it all. More than that, it had context. My room there wasn't just a place to store things, it was a living archive of who I was before rent, bills, and grocery lists took over. But after Jane's little expedition upstairs, something shifted. I'd always thought of my parents' house as an extension of my safe space. Somewhere my belongings could sit undisturbed, untouched, like they were in a personal museum that only I had the key to. But now I saw the flaw in that thinking. It wasn't my house. I couldn't control who came and went. I couldn't guarantee my rules would always be enforced. The truth was, my condo was the only place where I had complete control. The only door no one walked through unless I let them. The only space where I could leave something sitting in the middle of the floor for a week and know it would be in the exact same spot when I came back. It made me think about boundaries in a new way. We talk about boundaries like they're just verbal: "Please don't do this. I'd appreciate it if you didn't touch that." But verbal boundaries mean nothing to people like Jane. They hear them as suggestions. Physical boundaries, locks, keys, closed doors, those they understand. And in a weird way, I felt a little sad about that, because it meant I had to stop thinking of my parents' home as this perfectly safe place for my things. I still loved visiting, still loved my time there, but the magic of that untouched childhood bedroom was gone. Now it wasn't just my room. It was my locked room. The dolls weren't sitting under my protection because the house was safe. they were safe because I had to make it that way. I've always believed that the things we choose to keep say more about us than the things we throw away. Some people keep ticket stubs from movies they barely remember. Others keep a single coffee mug from their first apartment, chipped but still functional. Me, I keep 10 box dolls on the top shelf of a lavender-walled room in my parents' house. To an outsider, they're just plastic and fabric sealed in a layer of clear packaging. To me, they're moments, memories in physical form. They're the sound of my dad's suitcase zipping open after months away. They're the smell of airplane air clinging to his clothes. They're the warmth of his arms after weeks of absence. They're proof that even when distance separated us, I was on his mind. That's why Jane's intrusion stung so much. It wasn't about a doll being touched. It wasn't about the risk of the box being damaged or the plastic being smudged. It was about the lack of recognition that this mattered. When someone values you, they respect the things you value. They don't have to understand why, they just accept that it's important to you. Jane didn't care. She saw something shiny and decided it was hers to offer, hers to hand over to a child who couldn't possibly understand what she was holding. I used to think people like that could be reasoned with, that if I just explained the sentimental value, the history, the story, they'd get it. But I've learned that some people simply don't operate that way. If they don't see the value themselves, they don't believe it exists. So you protect your boundaries, you build them stronger. You put locks on doors, both literal and metaphorical. Some might say that being overprotective. I say it's honoring what matters to you. The lock on my childhood bedroom isn't just about keeping Jane or anyone else out. It's about claiming the right to decide who gets access to my history, to my memories, to the pieces of my life I've chosen to preserve. And maybe that's what adulthood really is, realizing that you can't control how other people behave, but you can control how much access you give them to the things that matter. Those dolls will probably stay in that room for years. I might bring them to my condo one day or to a future home. Maybe I'll show them to my own child if I have one and tell them the story of how their grandfather crossed countries to bring them to me. But one thing, for sure, no one will ever again just wander in and decide they're up for grabs. Because I've learned that protecting what you love isn't selfish. It's essential.